Good morning and welcome to the JCC of Metro Detroit's 69th Annual Detroit Jewish Book Fair. My name is Jamie Loeb and I'm the Senior Director of Cultural Arts here at the JCC. It is my pleasure to welcome you this Tuesday morning to this exciting event, What Could Go Wrong? Jews in Futurist Fiction. We'll be talking today with Jamie Krakover and Phil M. Cohen. The goal of the Detroit Jewish Book Fair is to bring the best new Jewish books and authors from around the world to Metro Detroit. This year, the rooms we're sitting in are different, but that purpose remains. The book fair runs through tomorrow, December 9th, and we have an exceptional lineup of events for you. You can see all of those and check out any events you may have missed at our website, culturalarts.jccdet.org/bookfair. You can also find ways to support the book fair there as well. And one of those ways is, of course, buying from our online bookstore, where you can find both Jamie Krakover's book, Tracker 220, and Phil Cohen's book, Nick Bones Underground, and of course, a wide selection of books and gifts. Hanukkah starts on Thursday. This year, in order to provide as much programming to the community as possible, we have made all of our events free of charge. So if you enjoy this book fair event and others, please consider becoming a patron. It is not too late, or donating to book fair. Of course, you can do either or both at our website, culturalarts.jccdet.org/book fair. We rely on community support to make this event happen every year. And so thanks in advance for becoming part of the family. The book fair team would like to thank the sponsors of today's event, Tama Budai and Rob PC, for their support. We have a really special event today, and we want you to be a part of it. You can submit your questions and comments in the YouTube comments section below, or you can text this number up on the corner of the screen, 248-702-5241. We do want to hear from you. We have an exceptional discussion planned, but we will get to as many of your questions as we can. So the focus of today's event is Jews and Jewish representation in futurist speculative science fiction. These are a lot of overlapping genres, so we may use any one of those words to describe the kind of books we're talking about. And we'll be talking with two authors of speculative fiction whose most recent books really focus on Jewish content. One is Phil M. Cohen, author of Nick Bones Underground, and our other author, as I mentioned, Jamie Krakover, author of Tracker 220. I'll be moderating this discussion, and I am so excited to finally put my sci-fi nerd skills to good use. So Phil M. Cohen, author of Nick Bones Underground, has a passion for storytelling that emerges from his love of fiction, his commitment to the Jewish tradition, and his rabbinical work. In Nick Bones Underground, Professor Nick Freeman takes a wild ride through a dystopian and dangerous New York City, searching for his old high school buddy, Shmuley Shimmer, which I gotta say, that's one of my favorite names ever. It's so fun to say. Told with sardonic humor, the novel offers an imaginative world and asks thought-provoking questions. Is it possible to overcome the burdens of past deeds? Can an AI computer change gender and convert to Judaism? And how did Nick Freeman become Nick Bones? And of course, who is Robbie the Rabbi? These are the burning questions of our age. Our other author, Jamie Krakover, wrote Tracker 220. She grew up with a fascination for space and things that fly, and turned that love into a career as an aerospace engineer. Combining her natural enthusiasm for science fiction and her love of reading, she now writes middle grade and young adult fiction. Tracker 220 is also set in a slightly dystopic world where everyone has a brain interfacing tracking chip. Imagine your iPhone was built right into your brain. And one glitch can threaten the entire network. Kaya Weiss, whose family can't observe a tech-free Shabbat, is that glitch. To fix the glitch, the authorities reset her tracker, leaving her to question more than the system's invasion into her faith. And Kaya will not be a lab rat again. So please join me in welcoming Jamie Krakover and Phil Cohen. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Morning. Great to be here. Thank you.
We're so glad to have you with us. So we're going to start by I've told the audience a little bit about you and your books, but I want to give you each a chance to sort of tell us about yourself, how you came to write the book that you wrote. So why don't we start with Jamie, and then Jamie, there we go. And then we'll go to Phil.
Sure. So, hi. I am an aerospace engineer, as Jamie said, and that's my day job. But I grew up in a house full of science fiction, everything from Star Trek to the Bionic Man to Battlestar Galactica, you name it. It was all on the TV, and developed a love of reading science fiction, and through that love, started actually writing science fiction. And Tracker 220 actually came about. I was sitting at a stoplight one day and just wondering, I was like, what would happen if what if you never got lost again? And I was like, well, what would make that happen? And so then it turned into, well, you could put a map in your head, and then it became a tracking chip, and then it became basically an iPhone in your head, which became this really interesting society where you could literally access information in the blink of an eye, but everything that you did was monitored. They knew where you were, they knew who you talked to, they knew what you did. And I was like, oh, this is a pretty scary world that I don't know that I would want to live in. But the main character, through her tracking chip, and then ultimately when it glitches, starts to question everything in the world that she's known, where she's always had this technology and always had access to this infinite knowledge. So she starts to explore and question, is this too invasive? How much tech is too much? And how does my Jewish identity really fit in with all of this technology?
So fun. Phil.
Well, the origins of the book go back far longer than I'd care to discuss. But at a certain point, I started writing a story set in real time about a character who meets the father of his best friend from high school while he's biking, while the character is biking Prospect Park. And the character begs him to go hunt for his son who's gone missing. The son had invented an incredibly powerful, popular designer drug that had a rather insalubrious effect if one took over 40 doses of it. That person had a better than average chance of going into an irreversible coma. This made the son, Shmuley Shimmer, a criminal. He gets caught, but he turns evidence on his partner, and he goes off on the witness relocation program. So that was the setup for the whole thing. And then I read a book by Philip Kerr, set in the near future, and it gave me the idea to try to science fictionize it a little bit, set this in the near future. And the rest of it, I have to say, came kind of organically. I was in a class recently with one of my teachers from the MFA program I participated in. She said, I don't outline. There are two kinds of writers. There's the writer who outlines and the writer who doesn't outline. And the writer who doesn't outline kind of lets the muse or the time or the mind or what have you take him or her along. And in a way, that's kind of what happened. This is also my first novel. So while I was inventing scenes and characters and ideas, I was also doing a novel for the first time. But through that, through this near future dystopic world, I found myself creating interesting characters. I think an AI who thinks she's crossed over into becoming a real human. She was a male, then a female, then a human, and this is a source of ongoing discussion between her and Nick. And the two of them go off into this world, and up in a world above ground, and a world that he discovers underground, a pretty sophisticated society, loosely based on the mole people who actually do live beneath New York City. But this is a bit more sophisticated. And through all of that, he learns about himself. He learns about the possibility of redemption, loss, and love. It became pretty thick, I think. And I'll leave it at that. Maybe the other aspects of this will come up as we continue the conversation.
Yeah, I think so. It's interesting. I enjoyed both of your books immensely, which is why we reached out to both of you. And you both describe your books as set in these dystopic times, but I don't know that I mean, they are worlds that maybe we don't really want to live in, but dystopia might be putting it a little strongly, right? Neither of them. Well, I guess Nick Bones, there's a kind of world-ending event, although it's a New York where nothing quite works right, which means it's just New York, right? Whereas Jamie, in your novel, there's nothing catastrophic has happened, right? We're not talking about a nuclear winter. We're not talking about zombie apocalypse, right? We're not talking about worldwide drought. We're talking about worlds that are similar to ours, but are slightly unpleasant, on various axes. So I would like for each of you to talk a little bit. So, one of the things I guess that makes a dystopia, it's our world, but, right? So in each of your books, there's a but. So I'd like you to each talk about what's the big twist of the world that you did in order to create the world of the book. So why don't we start with Jamie again for consistency?
All right. So I think in my world, it's the technology has advanced to the point where, it's this little tiny chip in your head and you can see everything kind of in your field of vision and think about things. And so it is the technology we have right now, but you don't have to carry the device around anymore. It's in your head. It's with you at all times. So there's no way to unplug. And then, of course, there's, flying cars and motorcycles and things like that, just because it's the future and that's cool. So,
right. The Jetsons promised us a lot, I got to say. Now, in your book also, Jamie, I do want to point out that the fact of the trackers being universal means that the company that has ownership and control over these trackers becomes very powerful. So the interaction of government power and corporate power, and it becomes also a sort of feature of this surveillance state.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a blurry line between the government and the authorities that control this technology and the company that actually owns it. It's all kind of blurry, and they all just kind of take control of it and enforce with an iron fist a little bit. So
yeah, I think you did a great job of, on the one hand, creating this ominous they. On the other hand, within the world, there were the characters seem to know the difference between one and the other, if that makes sense. It's specific enough to be scary, but vague enough that it's flexible, I guess is what I'm saying. Yeah. So Phil, tell us about the things that are broken in your world.
Yeah, so let me begin by pointing out that I think all science fiction, all speculative fiction, isn't really attempting to be prophecy. For prophecy, you got to go to the Hebrew Bible, and even there, they don't really foretell the future. It's not about prophecy. It's about taking certain current conditions and twisting them and pushing them in different directions, and kind of see how they play out against the background of characters who are nonetheless human. So you're putting real people, or you're putting people whom you've made up, but who hope to reflect something in our reality into a situation and see how it goes. That's really what a lot of science fiction is. And fiction itself, as Ursula Le Guin says in the introduction to her book, The Left Hand of Darkness, fiction is all a bunch of lies, and it's up to the writer to create really good whoppers so that the reader will get drawn into them. So I would say three elements in this book are the sort of background. The real background is there's been an economic disaster of some kind, called the Great Debacle, and I purposely don't go into any significant detail orienting the readers to how that happened. It's just there, and it's created a tremendous amount of poverty, which is what in fact creates the world underneath, as I mentioned earlier. Very poor people go underground and find a bit of sanctuary. And also, the book projects as it's turning out a a significant rise in the quality and ability of artificial intelligence machines. And this one character, as others have actually have in the imagination of the book crossed over into being real human. But there's a kind of a weird thing going on. Jamie, I like what you said, and you pointed this out in an earlier discussion. Things don't always go right with these computers. You can tell an AI to take you one street, and they'll drop you in a car, and they'll drop you off 5 blocks someplace else. The kinds of things that they do are not disasters. It's not a robot revolution.
Right.
In fact, I don't think these AIs would want to possess Earth. They kind of disdain Earth. But you can never count on your computer or your AI doing exactly what you want, except for Maggie, who's the second main character in the book. Yeah. Her you can always rely on. And third, there's a parody of religion in this book. It takes a serious Hasidic sect and plays out what might happen after the Rebbe dies. And while the reader may recognize an actual Hasidic sect, I in no means intended what happens to reflect what happens to that sect when their Rebbe dies, and a totally bogus, crazy religion arises, but finds great popularity. And so it raises the question there, and so all of those are real questions. How do we handle our economy? What does it mean to interact with this technology that we're developing? And when do we know? How can we know? Can we know when what a religion is preaching is authentic and meaningful? And I'd say those are 3 themes or 3 ideas that permeate the book.
Yeah. So I should point out, I mentioned this earlier, but just a reminder that Nick Bone's Underground is hilarious. It is so fun, so funny. I wouldn't call, I don't think it's not entirely parody, but it's really funny. I felt like it was filled with in-jokes in a way that is so not what you find usually in science fiction. Jamie's book is a bit more serious. It's not, I wouldn't say it's like a downer, right? It's meant for younger readers, but I enjoyed reading it. And I am slightly allergic to a lot of YA novels because I find I didn't love being a teenager. I'm not interested in hanging out in that world again. But because this was a bigger story and because it's very well written, it really did keep my interest. So I want to explore a little bit something that both of your books deal with, which is number 1, technology. Obviously, it's a common feature in science fiction, speculative fiction, to ask what if in relationship to technology. But both of you also explore the relationship between Jewish people, Judaism as a religion, as a culture, and technology. So I wonder if you could each talk a little bit about, how that works in your book and why you wanted to tackle like that specific relationship. And let's change it up a little. Let's start with Phil, and then we'll go to Jamie.
All right. Well, if I got what you're asking me, it's the main character is Jewish. He grew up. He spent junior and senior high school at a yeshiva with Shmuley Shimmer, which is where they met and where they became good friends. Sometime before the book opens, the character Nick Friedman has acquired this computer who does a virtual sex change operation one night and goes to bed. It's a male, wakes up, it's a female, and she names herself Maggie. So Nick, I picture Nick as similar to many people I've met. He's Jewishly educated. He has a PhD in some area of Jewish studies, and he teaches like religion at a New York university, not New York University, a New York university, and so continues to engage in the study of religion, but he's not religious. I met this kind of person many times. Maggie, who's a machine, is religious, and she keeps prodding Nick throughout the book as to why he's not engaging himself in the tradition, as all the while she becomes more and more, I guess, existentially involved in Judaism, because of course, as a machine, she knows everything about Judaism and speaks infinite number of languages and can do all kinds of things. So her factual knowledge of the Jewish tradition, as her factual knowledge of anything else she is interested in, is immediate and obvious. And I guess if this is enticing people to buy the book, I won't give away the ending.
Well, I guess the question is, like, so you set up this sort of counterpoint, right? You have the real Jewish person who, like many real Jewish people, is well educated, but perhaps not observant, not very doesn't do a lot of Jewish practice. And then you have this machine that is like perfectly educated and very religious, and you have that counterpoint between a sort of what you might call a cultural Jew and a practicing Jew. So what about that counterpoint was interesting to you? And I guess why is one half of that counterpoint a machine?
Well, I mean, why is it a machine?
Well, right. Why? I mean,
it's a machine because it's a machine. I'm not sure quite how to answer that, except that it allows me to play out the theme that permeates the book, which is, what does it mean to be a human being? I mean, this machine, which I, in a bogus way, I speculate, has crossed over into humanity. What makes that machine human? So to get away from the Jewish thing for a second, one of the continuing disputes between Nick and Maggie is she human? And what makes her human? Well, she can't eat. There's a scene where he's eating Chinese food with chopsticks with a woman who's his girlfriend, and he thinks to himself, Maggie can order this for me, she can pay for it, but she can't eat it. So there are lots of, but nonetheless, I think in at least the words on a page, let's the reader, I think, at least I think that she is peculiarly a human being, and stands as a foil, and as a machine that's also human, continually prodding the well-educated human character. I think is a fun way of actually asking that question out into the world, where as I said, and I think anybody who's in the Jewish community knows, there are innumerable people who think of Judaism as a culture but not a religion, and so forth. So that's not an obsessive issue in the book, but since you bring it up, Jamie, it does come out that way.
Yeah. So Jamie, Jews, tech.
Yeah. So when I originally wrote the book, there wasn't a lot of interaction between her Judaism and the technology. I actually had a critique partner say to me, she's like, Weiss is a really Jewish name. And I was like, well, she's Jewish, but I didn't know how to really make it meaningful in the story. I hadn't read a lot of genre fiction that had Jewish characters. A lot of the Jewish characters that I had read growing up were books about the Holocaust and historical events. And so I didn't know how to put that into the story and making meaningful without beating the reader over the head and saying, well, she's Jewish every other page, because that's not fun to read. But when I was querying and looking at getting a literary agent, I had a agent who actually became my agent. She gave me what's called a revise and resubmit. And that's when they're really interested in your book, but they think there's a lot of work in it. And so they want to see what you can do before they take you on as a client. And one of the pieces of feedback that she gave me was that, we know a lot about the world because Kaya tells us that's the way the world is, but we don't know, we don't get to see her really experience it. And something in that feedback comment really just clicked in my head. And I went, well, she's Jewish and she can't, if you've got technology in your head, then you can't observe a tech-free Shabbat. You can't turn things off. This device doesn't get turned off ever. So you don't get to experience that, turning everything off, shutting down and having a quiet Shabbat. So, and then I started to build on that piece and really build that into the story and add that layer. And in the story, her dad is pretty observant, and he grew up before this technology was implemented into everybody. So he's kind of that juxtaposition of how things were before this technology was implemented and then what it's like now. And he kind of laments the fact that that he was involved in building this technology. He was actually one of the people that worked to develop it. And so now, there's this juxtaposition of Kaya not understanding anything different, always having this technology, but then as her chip starts to glitch and turn off, she starts to experience what life is kind of on the other side of the fence. And so through that, she's able to start to say, well, maybe this isn't how things should be. I shouldn't just take it as face value, and starts to explore what Judaism means to her, and how much should tech be involved with that, and those kinds of things. And I think, growing up as somebody who's science-minded, that's something I've struggled with my Judaism is, where's the line? Where, with all this technology, how do I be Jewish and still observe in the ways that I can? And I think it's interesting because, when the Torah was written and all of these things, we didn't have all this technology. So it's Judaism's constantly evolving and being redefined. And you look at where we are now with coronavirus, we're having, Shabbat services on the computer when we're told, oh, well, we're supposed to shut everything down and, no tech and, relax and not work. And so it's this interesting evolution that we're seeing. And there's some similar parallels in the book, in terms of interpreting where is that line with technology and my faith and how I observe it.
Yeah, I think both of your books do a really great job of critiquing the world we're in, asking questions about the world we're in without being, heavy-handed about it. One of the joys of speculative fiction, I think, is one of the things I love about it anyway, is I love reading like science fiction from 50 years ago, because it tells you what people were interested in, what they were worried about, what they were scared of, right? A lot more than like, this is how the future will be. It tells you like what was in people's minds right then. So I think both of your books are great examples of that. I do want to take a small pause to remind you all that you can find both of the books at our online bookstore, which you can find right here. Highly recommended. Even if you say to yourself, I don't really like science fiction, you will like these books, I promise. Now, I want to pick up on something you were saying, Jamie, about not having seen Jewish characters in science fiction growing up. I had the same experience, and really until I had read both of your books, I don't know that I had noticed a Jew in science fiction ever before, except sort of metaphorically, right? There's this one character on a Next Generation, Star Trek The Next Generation episode that was, the one that was collecting things, and he tried to collect data, and I'm like, oh, he's supposed to be a space Jew. Anyway, it seems like in this science fiction world, there are a lot of Jews who write and create science fiction, but there are not a lot of Jewish people in these science fiction worlds, in these speculative worlds that get created. So I'd like each of you to talk a little bit about why it was important to you to populate your world with Jews, and why you think, even though you can sort of see Isaac Asimov's Jewishness in the question he asks, for example, like there's no Jewish content usually in science fiction. And let's start with Jamie again.
Yeah, so I think for me, it was just, wanting something to be out there that I wasn't seeing a whole lot of. I think we're starting to see more of that, especially in the kidlit space. There are some sci-fi and fantasy books out there that are cropping up, but a lot of it is in the contemporary space right now, or even the historical realm. And I think there's been a concerted effort to kind of bust out of that a little bit. But yeah, as an author, I wanted to write the kinds of books that I love to read and the kinds of books that I couldn't find when I was a kid. I was a reluctant reader at times, and I think it was because I struggled to find books about people like me and find books that were interesting to me. So I just kind of took all of that and scooped it up and said, I'm going to write a YA sci-fi and, include the Jewish aspect of it and, explore that.
Great. Phil?
Well, I got a couple of different things to say about that. First of all, I didn't research this exhaustively, but I have to mention two things. First of all, I'm on a listserv called H Judaic, and yesterday, I like everybody else who subscribes received an invitation to write a paper on Jewish fantasy, and the author laid out an intimidating number of opportunities as to how one could come up with a paper topic, leading me to believe that that the Jewishness in speculative fiction, both short story and novel and comic books and movies, is not quite as dire as one might think. Whether I submit a paper proposal or not is another story. But the second. The things I'm about to refer to, I know are kind of older, but nonetheless represent writers writing science fiction with real Jewish characters. For one, I recommended 2 volumes edited by a guy named Jack Dan, and now I can't remember the names of the book, but if you look them up, they're not in print, but they're still available. And those are 2 books full of short stories written by Jewish authors, and mostly have Jewish themes in them, including the only story that the only story Isaac Asimov lays claim to that has real Jewish juice in it. But there's also, let's not neglect Israel, where there is a lively science fiction writing community, and some of them have been translated into English, and characters not necessarily always Jewish, but the chances are greater than that. Now, as for why I created this Jewish ambiance, these Jewish characters, I mean, in the writing that I do, I almost never don't have a Jewish character in a story. It's pretty much in me, and I go by the assumption that I don't literally know the world that I created, but in one of the great advices you get in writing is Jewishness, Judaism, and Jews is what I know, and so I have the best chance of creating something that has resonance to my readers, and it just doesn't bother me. I mean, read novels and see movies all the time that have other characters of ethnic or religious background in them, and the authors and the filmmakers expect us to be able to resonate with those characters. And so I don't have any fear that if this book were to be read by people, and it is being read, but I hope it gets read by more people, that they don't say, "Oh, these characters are Jewish and I can't relate to that." Hopefully the way that I created the characters and the way Jamie created her characters, it's relatable, and people might learn something. In this kind of conversation, I always bring up the Friday the Rabbi Slept Late series. Kellerman, who created this rabbi in northern suburbs of Boston, where cases keep falling into his lap, and he uses his great Talmudic erudition to solve the cases. Well, that series, of which there were 8 or 9, sold over 7 million copies, I'm told. And I'm told that most of the readers were not Jewish. So I take great comfort in that. Not that I can equal that. I'll settle for 1 million copies. I don't need that. I take comfort in the fact that people out there want to read a Jewish character and maybe glean something from it about the character, the culture, the religion of the characters in it.
Yeah. So one of our listeners, viewers out in the world, Steve Schofer, who is also a member of our book fair committee. Hello, Steve. The name of Jack Dan's book is Wandering Stars and More Wandering Stars.
Right,
yes.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
And you can find copies of that out in the world. I recently almost bought a copy, so I know they're out there and they're not like hundreds of dollars. So I wanted to bring up another question. This one's from the audience. So what are each of you reading? Other than your own books, obviously, and your own work that you're working on. But like, what do you read for fun?
Yeah, so I'm currently reading a young adult sci-fi, shocker. It's called Goddess and the Machine, and it's about a girl who is cryogenically frozen on her way to another planet, and she wakes up like 3,000 years too late, and all of the people that she came with are dead. And the society she wakes up to is very different. The language is different, and they think she's a god. So the religion kind of revolves around her and what she can do, and it's because they all have technology in their heads as well. So how she interacts with the technology and can do things that to them appear like magic, but is actually just really advanced technology. So it's kind of an interesting parallel to what I'm reading now. But yeah.
Phil, what are you reading?
Well, I mentioned Ursula Le Guin before. I really like her.
Yep.
She's clearly a writer who's able to cross over from genre into general literature. Her writing is just terrific. So I'm about a third of the way into her book, The Left Hand of Darkness, in which she creates this incredibly imaginative world of a character from Earth who's a missionary, not a missionary. He's a shaliach. He's out on a mission to visit other planets, kind of like in the Star Trek mode, I guess, and help bring them into this unitary group of planets. And the characters are just really fascinating, and the questions she asks are fascinating. The nature of the people on the planet she's meeting, they're androgynous. Sometimes they're male, sometimes they're female, and it's really very interesting. On the other hand, I just finished a book called After Eden, which is a philosophical book by Paul Kahn, in which he explores in a very erudite and abstract way the nature of evil. But I also just recently finished a book by Philip Kerr, I keep mispronouncing it, Philip Kerr, who creates a character named Bernie Gunther. This is not sci-fi, this is straight mystery, who enters the world of fiction of just before World War II in Germany. He's a German character. And through him and Kerr, we read what I think is pretty good historical fiction as this guy, Bernie Gunther, tries to maintain his own humanity. Doesn't always succeed, by the way, going through the war, before the war, during the war, and then there are several books written after the war, and then Kerr died, I think, about a year ago, leaving us bereft of any more Gunther novels. So those are three things I'm reading at the moment, or finished reading, or I'm reading.
Right. I often tend to bounce from sci-fi to mystery, and I'm currently reading some P.G. Wodehouse. It's nice to have variety, certainly. So I want to go back to something that both of you mentioned a little bit. Obviously, both of your books have Jewish content and Jewish characters. Phil's book is perhaps more set in the Jewish world than Jamie's, but both of you obviously hope that non-Jews will read this book because you're authors, so you want everybody to read your book. And, I think most of us who love fiction, part of what we love about it is inhabiting someone else's mind, right? Whoever the sort of focus of the book is, you get to kind of live with them for a while. And part of the joy is when they are not like you. And that's, I think, an important part of how people learn empathy and those kinds of things. But it's also really important to see yourself existing in these worlds. And I think, one of the big discussions in TV and literature today is that push and pull between wanting to give everyone their due in terms of representation, but also wanting to invite people to sort of enjoy the experience of someone else in a way. So, I think sci-fi has this, and speculative fiction has this kind of trend towards universalizing, right? Like all humans are sort of unified in this one Earth government or one Federation government. You know what I mean? This kind of we're all brothers, it's all the same, kind of usually meant in an optimistic kind of way. But what I'm getting at is I would like for each of you to tell us your thoughts on this sort of tension right now between, diverse representation and the desire for your readers to empathize with someone who is different from them. So Jamie, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, so I think sometimes it's hard to step outside your own box and understand somebody else's life or what somebody else is going through. And I think literature in particular is one way that really helps people empathize and understand what other people are going through. And so in the recent last few years, I've seen a huge push for diversity, and especially in the kidlit space. And I think it's really important because I've read, books just to learn about other people and the experiences that they're going through, and to understand them better. And a lot of times there's parallels to what's going on in the world, through those books. So I think it's a great thing. I love to see all the diversity that's out there. And I think, you sometimes hear the complaint, well, it's just this, but we added, a diverse character. And it's like, well, no, because it's a completely different person with a completely different background experiencing maybe a similar event, but they're going to deal with it and move through it in a completely different way. And that's what makes it interesting. So, you could tell the same story over and over again, but if you put a different protagonist in there from a different background, you're going to get a different story every single time, which I think is really cool. And I think, I don't remember who said it, but somebody's got a list out there, and there's really only 6 different story types that are out there. The chosen one, the chosen one being one of them. And so, really we're all just telling the same stories over and over again. So it's the backgrounds and the experiences of the characters and the people that are writing it that make it interesting and different.
Mm-hmm. Phil, your thoughts?
So first of all, that introduction to the Le Guin book I mentioned earlier, where I said, she points out fiction is all lies. She also says fiction is all metaphor. She doesn't explore metaphor for what, but the notion that if you're reading a book and you're enjoying it for all the reasons you enjoy a book, setting, character, theme, dialogue, plot, it's also you're also enjoying it because it somehow reflects something about our own world that perhaps you can even take with you when you've concluded the book. If I can wax kind of religious for a minute, or at least Jewish, well, sure. one of the big, which I guess is religious, one of the big conflicts that Jews in America, Jews in after the Enlightenment always struggle with is, what's the intersection, the interaction between the universal and the particular. Universal being everything, and the particular, so how do we behave in the American world, maintaining our Jewishness but being American at the same time? And it's a continual back and forth. It's an unresolvable tension. But I think in some sense, applying that to writing, and not necessarily Jewish writing, but you identify your characters. In my case, the 3 main characters, I guess there are 4 main characters, they're all Jewish, and maybe they're more or less interacting from a kind of a Jewish configuration, but it's a way of getting from that, what the reader can get from one particular, the particularity of all that, which drills down to the particularity of these characters per se, and it's then an avenue out into a broader way of understanding the world. And it's arguable that you can't get to the universal without really operating from within the particular, because the particular is what grounds the person, what grounds you, and it's what enables you to then look out into the world with your own set of ideas, and then the world changes you and you change the world. I did want to say one other quick thing, which is, as readers, I guess once we get out of college or graduate school, where we engage in a great deal of reading of a diverse type, we might find ourselves siloing down into one genre or other. But I think to a certain extent that genreizing of our reading favorites it reflects a little bit of just wanting to lean back and not be challenged. But moving from genre to genre, you find that the writing is pretty much similar, and you don't have to read a mystery all the time, or sci-fi, or romance, or or Dickens. But that reading all of these gets you an enriched experience that's not too difficult to get into, even if you've been reading romance for the last 20 years.
Sure. And certainly we at the Detroit Jewish Book Fair recommend reading widely. Read all the things. I certainly understand, especially these days when times are tough. You just, whatever feels cozy to you is what you're going to gravitate towards. But Phil, you're absolutely right. That the challenge and the breadth of reading widely is so important. So we have a really interesting question from Steve again. Hi, Steve. So he says, when I was growing up, there were lots of Jewish science fiction writers: Asimov, Ellison, Silverberg, and of course, Gene Roddenberry. He says you couldn't read science fiction without tripping over the tribe. So he asked what your theory is for the lack of Jewish authors in science fiction. I guess he means today. So I suspect if you look at the past 50 years, right, Jews are slightly overrepresented in sci-fi writers and creators. But it does seem like the past maybe 10, 15 years, that's been less of the case. Do you find that that's less of the case, or are they not rising to the top the way they used to? Any thoughts, either of you?
Well, I'm caught with my metaphorical pants down. I can't really answer that question adequately. I'm tempted to want to go to Google right now and type in Jewish science fiction writers, because I'm just not equipped to give you a laundry list of contemporary Jewish writers. So I don't know that the question has its basis in reality or not. I just don't know.
Right.
I mean, I can come up with certainly a couple Jewish sci-fi writers, but I don't know that the quantity of them has decreased over the last 50 years. I'll take it as an assumption, but I can't comment on it.
Yeah,
Jamie, do you have any thoughts on this? Have you seen that? Has there been a decline in your mind?
I don't know that there's been a decline. I think there's always been the Jewish authors. I think we're finding new ways to, I think, squeak it in there in more of a sly manner in some ways. And I think, there's a lot of stuff out there that's tied to Jewish mythology and mysticism, and to the naked eye, quote unquote. It may not be as obvious that it's linked to something that we study in Judaism or that's involved with Judaism, but I think in some cases there's actually more of it. I think it's just kind of shifting where it's at. I think there's always been the Holocaust books and the historical, because that's a big part of Jewish history. But I think at least for the kidlit space, you're starting to see more of that fantasy and sci-fi, and I think some of it is because there's more of an emphasis on diversity and telling diverse stories. But I think also, in talking to a lot of Jewish authors, it's something that we all struggle with. We just naturally default to tell the story and not, how do we incorporate that Jewish aspect? And, as I mentioned before, that's something I struggled with. How do you incorporate that Jewish piece of the story without beating the reader over the head with it? So, and making it meaningful. So I think that's something that a lot of authors struggle with. And you look at a lot of mainstream media, and it's rare that you see a Jewish character or something that relates, to Jewishness, or so. And if it is there, it's something sly. I mean, you look at what Leonard Nimoy did with the Vulcan salute is actually out of Judaism and a nod to that. So so I think it's there. I think it's hard to find sometimes, maybe, and you have to find the right spaces.
Yeah.
Mm.
So I do want to give a nod to Michael Chabon, a Jewish author
Right.
of Yiddish Policeman's Union and
Right.
other books that I'm forgetting the titles because that one was my favorite. He is now the showrunner for Star Trek Discovery.
Right.
So
Right.
he has joined the sci-fi ranks, and I think I'm promise I'm not being paid by Star Trek. I'm just a nerd. If you're looking for a good model of diversity in science fiction, I think you can't go wrong with Discovery. I'm really enjoying it as a show, but I think it's really getting a lot right in terms of diverse characters. But
Right. Can I say a couple of things?
yeah, please.
I mean, about that show? I mean, what Chabon does, it's not overtly Jewish. The characters aren't Jewish, but Picard has to go to a certain planet to find somebody who ends up helping him throughout the rest of the first season. He goes to the planet Vashti, and that cracked me up. I have no idea. I mean, I could see all the Jewish viewers like cracking up at that. And then in the end, Picard, and I may be spoiling Picard. Picard dies, and they bring him back, and they bring him back as a golem. So there's the Jewishness in that. It's a pretty good series. It may be worth subscribing to the network to get it.
And maybe he was the showrunner on Picard, not Discovery. Picard is also great. Highly recommended.
Picard, that's right. I didn't mean to correct you, but it's Picard because
So I want to talk a little bit about your day jobs to a certain extent. So it seems like a lot of science fiction writers have day jobs, right? Carl Sagan, for example. So both of you have jobs other than writing fiction. So Phil, you're a rabbi. Jamie, you're a rocket scientist. So I'd like to hear how your life outside of writing fiction influenced possibly your plans for this book and also influenced your writing process. So Jamie, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I was actually one of those people one of those kids growing up that hated to write. I think it was in like first grade or something. They used to send home these story starters, and I would sit at the kitchen table and literally cry because I didn't know what to write. I would think all of my ideas were dumb, and my sister would run around the kitchen just spewing idea after idea after idea, and it would drive me crazy. But somewhere in my love of space and reading science fiction and then becoming an aerospace engineer, I started getting all of these ideas. And I think some of that was leveraging all the reading that I was doing, but some of it was also, some of the things that I was experiencing in my career and some of the other media I was consuming. And so that really kind of pulled everything together for me. And I think it's fun to kind of leverage the technology and the things that are out there, that are kind of cutting edge right now. And then use that and say, well, what if we twisted this a little bit or pushed it a little bit further into something that we could explore even further. So, obviously I have to be a little bit careful with my job and can't disclose any proprietary information or things like that. But, if there's certain things I tell you, I'd have to kill you kind of thing. But no, but in all seriousness, like taking that love of technology and things that are out there and using that to leverage and research what else is out there and what else I can play with.
Phil, how about you?
Well, first of all, I just want to say it occurs to me that Jamie, the comment, it's not rocket science coming from your mouth, has real meaning when you're talking to people.
Sometimes it is.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of different things. I mean, first of all, I had a friendship a while back with a sci-fi writer. I'm sorry, I can't remember his name either. I'm over 60. I can't remember anything. And he once told me that he took great pride. He's an enormously prolific guy, like 200 books or something, nowhere near Asimov, who wrote over 500 books. But he told me, he felt blessed to be one of maybe 100 science fiction writers in the country who actually made a living out of their writing. And having written a book and finding that even though I have some confidence in its quality, I've yet to see it on the New York Times bestseller list. I can accept that notion that I'm not going to make a living out of writing these books. But so I'm going to focus. I guess I'm going to focus on just one aspect, maybe two to that question. I love teaching Torah. I hope every rabbi says the same thing. And whenever I teach a Torah class, almost always, we'll be reading a passage, and either I'll have in front of me or someone will have from a commentary they have in front of them some midrashic notion as how to twist and pull and push the text. The text. So, for instance, I was studying last night Jacob and his wives, and some commentator writes, an ancient commentator writes that Leah was, Jacob was expecting to marry Rachel. He marries Leah, and one of the reasons Leah was anxious to get married in this commentary was she had been promised to Esau, Jacob's evil brother. Now that's out of somebody's imagination. That's the point I'm saying. The midrashic tradition, or at least the aspect of the midrashic tradition that comes up most frequently among people studying Torah, is the imaginative push and pull of the characters, moving them into sometimes totally unexpected territory. And I've always resonated with that idea of really playing with that text. And so, in a way, writing, and I have written some modern midrashim. A couple of them have seen the light of day. But the idea of taking characters and pushing and pulling them and pushing them in directions, sometimes you read writers talking about their own writing or the art of writing, and they'll say, they don't know where the character is going to take them that day. Now, I think there's a little bogusosity to that. The writer always ultimately has control over the character, but writers, I think, have all had the experience of, the character wants to do this, the character wants to do that, and it's unexpected in terms of what I had set out to do that day when I sat down to write. The other part is being a rabbi and out in the community gives me access to an incredible, unbelievable number of characters. Some good, some interesting, some I wish I hadn't met, but all of them giving me fodder, that's not a good word, grist for my mill in creating character and putting words into people's mouths and taking them in directions. And so about my being a rabbi, those are the two things I would say helped me in my writing.
Well, we're starting to get near the end of our time, so I want to take a minute and let people know that you can find more of Phil's work here at his website. And I am looking, there it is. I also want to let you know you can find more from Jamie at her blog and also Twitter. I highly enjoy your Twitter feed, by the way, Jamie. She has some great recommendations for other young adult and kid lit books that you may be interested in. I tried to post them in the comments, but YouTube decided it was spam. So head on over to her blog or her Twitter feed and get in touch with her if you're looking for sci-fi or speculative, imaginative kind of books for younger readers, because that's sort of her expertise. So this has been really fun, and I think I feel, I don't know if it's true, but I feel that Jews are overrepresented in sci-fi nerd land. What are your feelings on that? So do either of you actually live in sci-fi nerdland, or, and if you do you feel like there are a lot of Jews there, or is it just sort of me making some guesses? Jamie, let's start with you.
So yeah, I live, eat, breathe, sleep sci-fi nerdland. So that's, I think that's my world. Yeah, I mean, I think they're there for sure. I see a lot of Jews in the kidlit space, especially in the sci-fi fantasy realm. I think there's more of them popping up every day. I'm like, oh, there's somebody else I missed, and then got to go check them out too and see what they're writing and what they're up to. So.
Phil?
Well, first, if I can be a little pushy, if you go to my website, philmcohen.com, and you sign up for my email list, I got a little present for you, a collection of about 7 stories that have been unpublished that I'll send out to you. As for science, Jews represent. I mean, here's a little bit of speculation, and I think it goes into our contemporary time frame. Science fiction is a great place to stick your nose and eyes if you feel like you're an other. You feel a little bit outside of things. Now, Jews aren't the only people who feel outside of things. I think everybody between the age of 13 and 17 does, Jewish or not. But I think it's been a good home for Jewish readers who want to feel enfranchised into an imaginative world where you can really exercise your mind and feel at home.
Yeah, that sounds very true. And I think, one of the things that both of your books show is that, Jews like to ask the big questions. Obviously, not every single Jew, right? But like as a culture, we value asking big questions. So I think, it's part of why we love sci-fi, part of why we create sci-fi. And it's been so fun having you both here with us today.
Yeah, well, no, thank you. Jamie, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say thank you both for being here.
Thank you very much. It's been great. You're a great interviewer. Jamie Loeb, you're a great interviewer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We maybe need to set a limit on how many Jamies per square inch next time. So Jamie Krakover has shared with us another bookshop that focuses on Jewish main characters. So I'm going to put that in the chat. If you're interested, I'm also going to remind you that you can find both of their books here at our bookshop, our online bookstore. So thank you so much to Phil. Thank you so much to Jamie. And of course, thank you to all of those of you watching from home. Our next event is Life Isn't Everything, Mike Nichols as remembered by 150 of his closest friends, which was compiled by Ash Carter and Sam Kashner. We'll be talking with both of them at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time today. I hope you can join us for all of that. And of course, you can find our full schedule and ways to get involved here at our website, culturalarts.jccdet.org/bookfair. While you're here on our YouTube channel, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, hit the reminder bell so that you'll always be up to date on all of our exciting events. Thanks so much and have a great day.